welcome to this videocast and podcast for subscribers to davidicke.com. Well, it was announced in Parliament this week in the so-called Queen's Speech, where for viewers around the world, the government has its upcoming policies in the next session of Parliament delivered by the Queen, who talks about my government will do this, my government will do that, because of course we live in a democracy. And many things stood out, but this one in particular, because it's been a major area of my own research over the years, and that's the adoption of children. What the Queen's Speech said the government was going to do was make it easier for children to be adopted and to make it quicker. Now, what they want is to increase the numbers. On one level, if you don't put things into context, people might say, well, that's fine, it's all right. Children are in care, they ought to be adopted, it would be better for them. And in some cases, that is correct, but that's not what I'm talking about. Forced adoption and the scandal of it is not about putting children into care who are being abused and then into adoptive situations. It's about the state stealing children from loving homes and loving parents on the most spurious, outrageous, invented, ludicrous criteria. And when I look at this proposal to speed up the adoption of children, what I see very clearly is another way of speeding up the forced adoption of children. Everything is context. If you don't have the context, whatever you're looking at cannot be seen in its entirety, in its true connect the dots meaning and relevance. And what I've been exposing in the books over the years is an agenda to constantly erode the influence of parents over their children, control of parents over their children's upbringing, on the way, longer term, though not as longer term as you would imagine, I'll come to that, to bring an end to parenthood, even longer term, an end to even producing children through parental procreation. You know, when I say that books like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and Eric Blair, George Orwell, and his book 1984 were not written anything like entirely from their imagination, but from knowledge of where this was going, that is being shown to be correct almost by the day, in the sense that what they were writing about, apparently in novels, has proved to be so staggeringly accurate in real world events and changes in human society. And Huxley was talking about the fact that children would be brought up in so-called world state hatcheries through laboratory means. And to get there through what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, step by step, so people don't see the pattern until it's too late, they have to prepare people for that, prepare the ground for it. And that means taking away the power of parents over what happens to their children. There are many ways this is being done, which I'll come to, but the most extreme and the most horrific is to create, as they have, a social services mafia designed to take as many children away from parents, loving parents, as they can get away with. The last figures I saw were that some 12,000 children in England alone, and this is happening in other places like the United States, are taken from parents and put into care and on into forced adoption as they do, against the will of the parents. 12,000. And the stitch up is staggering, because all this is done through secret courts without juries, who do not have to make decisions based on the criteria of evidence demanded in a criminal case. And so you have laws which prevent parents from even talking publicly about what has happened to their children and why they were taken away and the case in general. Parents have been, and relatives have been jailed for doing that. This is free Britain we're talking about, it says here. And it's not only British, English families. Many families that have moved to Britain from abroad, who are here making their lives or careers, have had their children taken away. A few years ago, there was a meeting at the House of Commons involving representatives from 34 countries complaining about how members of their countries have had their children taken away by social services in England. And the parents have got no chance. You have the judge representing the system. You have social services representing the system. You have lawyers representing the system, and all in the pay of the system. And you have experts put in the witness box to say why, in their expert opinion, that these children should be taken from their parents, who are also of the system and are often in the pay of the very same authorities that are trying to take the children away. This state stealing of children hasn't come about by accident, by a series of things that happened and we just somehow got here. It's systematic, and it's part of this greater picture that we need to look at, that puts what is happening in this situation into the context of that longer term agenda that I'm talking about. Of course, you know, when anything is appalling and horrific, then you'd think by reflex action that Tony Blair would be involved, and he was. During his time as Prime Minister, incentives, financial incentives, were introduced for local authorities and social services to take more children away from parents and put them into adoption. Financial incentives. Because he said he wanted adoptions to increase by 50%. And now the heir of Blair, Cameron, is putting it out there in another way, worded slightly differently, but the aim is just the same. because they're both representatives of the same one-party state. We've had a situation where social workers have been sacked for opposing the forced adoption of children in various situations. And this is another part of what I'm talking about. As with the police, as with the law enforcement, as with the system administration in general, there has been a policy of recruiting more and more psychopathic-like people into social services. And by psychopathic-like, I mean with no empathy for the suffering they cause to others, like parents, loving parents. They've been recruited to carry out this policy. And decent social workers with something in here who look at cases on their merits and don't want to take children from situations they don't need taking from, they're being sifted out, even, like I say, some of them openly fired for defying this policy and this pressure. Take the children, forced adoption, forced adoption. And we've had parents too who have been taken to these secret courts, had their children taken away from them for alleged abuse of them, who have then been cleared in courts, proper courts, of being involved in any abuse. But by the time they were cleared, their children had been forcibly adopted, and the system said, oh no, can't take them back now. This is what is happening. So put this into the context again of other things that are going on this road to the brave new world. Look at all the ways that parental influence and parental decisions are being eroded and taken away. Look at the power now, more and more, that's being given to schools and head teachers. You know, there was a case in the last week or so involving someone actually living where I do on the Isle of Wight, who was taken to the High Court, or went to the High Court, to take on the Isle of Wight ludicrous, in brackets, council, because they wanted to fine him, as unbelievable numbers of parents are being fined now in this country, for taking his child out of school in term time to go on holiday to Disney World for a week. They wanted to fine him for every day that he was away. And the child was not at school. He refused to pay. And it went to the High Court, and brilliant, the judgment went in his favour. But you watch the government now, Cameron, forced adoption Cameron, come back with ways to block that legal loophole and force everyone to be fined if their children don't go to school, go to prison is the correct way of putting it. See one of my other video casts in the last few weeks about schools as prisons. And so parents have to put their children in school, otherwise they get fined for every day that they don't. Then you've got a situation in Scotland, and for Scotland, read That's What They Want Everywhere, where they are appointing a state guardian, so-called named guardian, to every child at birth until aged 18 to oversee, on behalf of the state, the upbringing of that child, doing all the things that parents are supposed to do. And not only that, opening the floodgates of possibility to finding more and more reasons why children should be taken from their parents. This is a list of points that are made by those who have opposed this state guardian outrage, tyranny in Scotland. They point out that the scheme is compulsory. Every child will have a named person by law. They will have the power to assess confidential data on the family and to talk to a child without their parents agreeing with what they say. One piece of government guidance says a named person has, quote, responsibility for overall monitoring of the child's well-being and outcomes. That's what parents do. Idiots. Well, no. People administrating this into reality are just following orders and embarking upon idiocy by thinking this is justified. In the shadows, it's not idiocy at all. It's cold calculation on the road to the brave new world. The named person is legally responsible for monitoring the well-being of every child. On whose criteria? Oh, the state's got you. Government-funded guidance says well-being is another word for happiness, as this document asks, how can the state monitor the happiness of every child? But if the child is unhappy, well, maybe there's some emotional situation here involving the parents, and should they stay with the parents? And that's another thing. What Blair brought in as well was an expanded criteria for abuse, which involved emotional abuse, which you can ride a coach and horses through in terms of making it mean whatever you want. And that's what is happening. This vast increase in forced adoptions are invariably to do not with physical abuse, but emotional abuse, according to the state, which they can just make up. There's always an expert on the payroll who will come in the witness box and say whatever you want. It says here, the current law says social services can intervene where a child is at risk of significant harm, but named persons can intervene merely where there are concerns about a child's well-being or happiness, yes, and then pass them on to social services. How parents in Scotland have allowed this to happen is beyond my imagination. There are a lot of people fighting this. Every single parent in Scotland should be involved in that. If you don't do it now, well, what's it going to be like further down the road? Because this is not the end of it. It's just where we are. And you've got, of course, lengthening of the school day. That's coming up more and more. Starting children even earlier. Some bloke involved in Ofsted, the government's kind of education organisation, is talking about putting children in school at the age of 2. God, it's madness. But from the shadows, it's cold calculation. Here we have a story this week. Mississippi bill requires teachers to grade parents. Now the teachers are grading parents according to parental response for requests for conferences and communication, the student's completion of homework and preparation for tests. Now the frickin' parents are at school. If this goes through. The frequency of the student's absence and tardiness. The student's overall grade per 9 weeks assessment. Look at where this is going, step by step. Another story this week. Ontario proposes forced re-education for parents who choose to not vaccinate their children. Of course, this is part of this other agenda connected to this one of forced vaccinations. When it comes to regulatory tyranny, this article says, Canada and the United States have been one-upping each other for some time. Put Britain in there as well, and many other countries. For most people who believe in medical choice, the march towards mandatory vaccination has raised an alarm. But for students of history, it should be forced re-education of any type that signifies when the final line is about to be crossed. Ontario, Canada, lovely place, in terms of those who run it. Ontario, Canada has a new proposal. Ontario holds Canada's highest population and has long been setting vaccine standards which have been trending towards authoritarian. Its new Immunisation 2020 initiative seeks to build upon decades-old policies requiring by law that students be vaccinated in order to attend school, as well as children attending licensed daycare centres. The amendments to the Immunisation of Schools Pupils Act would require parents and guardians who are considering not immunising their children for non-medical reasons to participate in an education session delivered by their local public health unit. Parents or guardians would have to complete the session before obtaining a vaccine exemption. And through the totalitarian tiptoe, no exemptions are what the plan is to introduce eventually. So here we have a situation where children coming to the world, they're straight in the authority situation of what we call the education system, very bravely and inaccurately. And they're increasingly forced to in various ways to have this total toxic shite pumped into them from the earliest ages in grotesque amounts, while their immune system is still developing. Will never be the same again after that. And now we're having parents fined for their children being away from school for a day. And we're having this grotesque forced adoption situation, taking children from loving parents. Anybody see a pattern here? Do you know, I think I do. And even the longer term pattern is clear to see. This is another story from this week. Secret meeting discusses synthetic humans. Now, as I've been writing over the years, the idea is to create a synthetic human which is created in laboratories and bring an end to parenthood, an end to procreation. That's the long-term goal. What is in Brave New World is the plan. So here we are, secret meeting discusses synthetic humans. The idea of creating a human out of chemicals in a lab may sound unsettling, but what may be more worrisome is that experts recently held a secret meeting to discuss the possibility. Now, when something is happening in public, when something's announced in public, this is what has been discovered, whatever, it's always light years behind where they are in the secret projects and the underground bases and the secret laboratories. So when it says in this story, well, they're not there yet, well, outside of the public arena, they will be either there or very close to it already. Around 150 medical researchers convened at Harvard Medical School to contemplate the concept of building a human genome with chemicals and ultimately bringing that person to life. Indicative of how controversial the proposal might be, attendees at the conference were forbidden to talk to the media or tweet about the event. When word of the meeting reached the greater scientific community, many expressed concern over the wealth of ethical issues, I could care less about them, which would arise from such an experiment. Others expressed chagrin over the secretive nature of the discussion, saying that the clandestine conference was unusual for scientific researchers. However, one of the event's organisers attempted to downplay the conspiratorial suspicions which had been attached to the meeting by explaining that the secrecy was necessary due to an impending scientific paper, blah, all right, okay. The article ends, but with our understanding of the human genome continuing to improve and the possibility looming far on the horizon, not so far as you think, the secret Harvard meeting may have provided us with a troubling glimpse of our species' future. Exactly. Context. Everything is context. If you don't put it, whatever you're looking at, in connection with other things, so the pattern, the picture can be seen, you can't understand what you're looking at. And in terms of the agenda for our children and parents, that pattern is getting clearer by the hour.